Hi and welcome to Z Games. Recorded live at 4ZZZ Studios in Brisbane and broadcast nationally over the Community Radio Network, Z Games brings you the latest gaming news, reviews and interviews from across Australia and around the world.
Welcome again, listeners, to another exciting episode of Z Games, especially you, my favourite listener. That's right, you. You're all our favourite listener. We are Australia's most beloved and longest-running gaming radio show, coming to you live from the 4ZZZ Studios in Brisbane, but you might be listening to us around the nation on the Community Radio Network. I am Lee, and in the studio for this episode, Razor.
Hello.
Jody Macgregor.
Hello.
Returning again, Miss Candi Payne.
Hi.
And we will be talking to Morgan Jaffit of Defiant a little bit later on, who's also in here but not mic'd up. He's making gestures. What are we talking about on tonight's episode, Ray?
Like you mentioned, Morgan will be our guest. He is part of Defiant Development, a studio that launched Hand of Fate last week for the PC, PS4, PS Vita, Mac,
Xbox One,
all of those good consoles. So we'll be talking to him about that game, as well as that The Order 1886 is a PS4 exclusive that I've been playing all week.
Really, all week?
For some hours of the week.
A couple hours of the week.
save something for the review. He might not have very much.
I wanted to get ahead of that one.
So I'll be delivering my verdict on that game a little later on. But let's get this episode started, as usual, with the week in gaming news headlines. Ms. Candi Payne?
Thank you, Razor. Valve has announced that they will be showing off their virtual reality hardware at the Game Developers Conference held next week in San Francisco. Previous statements from the company, makers of Steam, Team Fortress and Portal, indicated that they did not intend to manufacture VR hardware. The company are also expected to show off their own version of the Steam machine as well as the latest version of their Steam controller.
They were working on VR for a while, though, weren't they?
Well, it wasn't a headset. They were doing that thing where you had to put dots all over the room and then it would get scanned in.
Like a holodeck.
Like the motion.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly like a holodeck.
Jeez. BioWare co-founder Dr. Greg Zishuk has returned to the video games industry after previously retiring to pursue a career in beer journalism. Zishuk will not return to Mass Effect and Dragon Age Company, instead becoming the chair of Bieber, a studio that is working on an app for children that will pair mobile devices with playgrounds.
That sounds pretty cute.
Yeah.
I want to know what that is.
I want to know what beer journalism is and how I can retire to it.
Yeah, I know. I feel like that was really the question I wanted to ask.
I think we can investigate both.
Yeah.
Yes. Video card manufacturer Nvidia is facing a class action lawsuit that alleges that they misled consumers about the specifications of the GTX 970 graphics card. The card is advertised as having 4 GB of video RAM, but users have found that there are noticeable performance issues when using over 3.5 GB.
So, Lee, that's your card.
That is my
Are
card.
you looking forward to your $7 reimbursement when that comes?
I can't wait. It's sort of annoying. I think that they probably shouldn't, if they're going to admit fault, which they have, and they have attributed this to just a lack of communication between the tech team and the marketing team, then they should probably do something to make up for it, but they're not, because then they don't want to be liable to the people who actually produce and sell the cards, but at the same time, sort of annoying, not really great for people who want to be pushing those, the lots of textures and stuff, which is the reason why I bought the card. Nvidia, come on, guys. Don't break my heart like this. Yeah.
And finally, to our local Brizzy listeners, if you are looking for something fun and free to do on Thursday evening after 5 p.m, then head to the Brunswick Street Mall. As part of Briz Asia Festival, you can attend a games night and join in some fun board games like mahjong, chess, and Chinese checkers.
Our next guest is the creative lead at a company called Defiant Development, who are previously known for Ski Safari, the awesome mobile game. They just launched last week Hand of Fate, which is a... It's a hard to describe game, so I'll get Morgan to describe it.
We just discussed this. You can't pitch it in one sentence.
But we have with us here Morgan Jaffit. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, Hand of Fate is a deck-building game where you sit across the table from a mysterious dealer who deals out a hand of cards for you. Those cards represent like a dungeon floor that you go through, and some of those adventures are kind of choose your own adventure style where you pick from different options, and some are action RPG style where you get into kind of Arkham style combat and defeat enemies. And every time you beat one of his opponents, you get a whole bunch of new cards which you can then use to kind of deck build the way the game goes from there. It's definitely a genre mash hybrid hip hop thing.
It's a unique concept, and as you said yourself, it's hard to explain succinctly. I guess with that comes an element of risk for you guys investing in the project. Now that the internet has collectively decided that it's awesome, what's the feeling now in the studio?
Oh, well, it's definitely a feeling of unclenching. Because it's always really hard to know whether you're going to launch out to a flop or a success. And we're a biggish team, we're an indie team, but we're still 15 people, so it costs a lot day to day to keep us running. And we weren't going to be broke tomorrow. Life's okay, but it was very comforting to know that I hadn't sent my business partner broke by investing all our magic beans in something that didn't grow into a beanstalk. So it's good.
So you guys launched a Kickstarter back in late 2013.
Yeah.
Are you happy with the way that you've handled that campaign, and are the backers in turn happy with you?
Well, I'm stoked. We haven't had any complaints, so we've tried to over deliver on everything because the Kickstarter backers are our first 1,000 customers in the real world, and a lot of them are people I know personally. So, I really was desperate not to screw them over. But the ones I didn't know personally, even more so. They weren't investing in us because we were friends. They were investing in us because they believed us, and that was our launch pad into the market. So all I've taken as my kind of basic value is under promise, over deliver. And that's how I've always worked. And it means I don't do well in American business. We negotiate a lot of contracts where the other person is just like, yeah, whatever you want. We'll tell you we'll do it. No problems. Then we won't. But that's cool. We've got the money then. And our approach is always pretty understated. And we're like, no, this is what can be reasonably done, and we'll do that, and we'll do it to an excellent standard. And the same's true of Kickstarter. So not only did everybody get access to the game earlier than we promised they would, all backers got extra copies. Everybody who got physical stuff got an extra physical copy of the game. We're giving all the backers the first DLC free. They'll be getting the soundtrack free as well, which should go out in the next day or so. We offered refunds to anybody who was unhappy, because I absolutely just want happy people, which nobody's taken us up on so far. And overall, I'm really pleased with how that's gone. And we kind of had a modified version of that for the early access players who've been with us for like the last 7 months, where we said everybody who bought it in early access gets the first DLC free as a small thank you for being on board when the game wasn't as good as it is now.
Were there issues that you encountered with the Kickstarter? Because you launched, I think, one of the first big Kickstarters for Australia,
Yep.
right? So, yeah, what pitfalls would you avoid if you were to do that again?
So we had some stuff where we had guest designers who very generously offered to give their time, and that didn't work out as well as we'd hoped, because they're successful, busy people. And our pipeline wasn't set up to get their work in until really late. So the crossover there wasn't great. I wouldn't do that again. I'd try and get people to commit work, and then once that work was committed, I'd announce it. Kickstarters are always tough because you've got to talk about what you will do and what you will bring to the table. We did exclusive cards for backers, which has not been a big problem, but there are certainly people on Steam who are like, I will never buy this game because I can't get 100% of it. Somebody has something I don't, and therefore it's absolutely untenable. And I understand that in a multiplayer game, but less in a single-player game. And we do have about 450 cards, and backers have 5 that nobody else has. But then there's going to be another 50 or so through DLC and expansion packs and free expansions. I feel pretty comfortable about our value for money, but people have got up in arms about that. And I understand that point of view.
Let's talk about the game, because the last time we interviewed you was back in late 2013, and I've forgotten the questions that I asked you back then, and I'm sure our listeners have as well, so I can feel comfortable asking you stuff that we might have asked you back then. Whose genius idea was it to have this card game that comes to life, and how did you develop that concept?
We are not a very design document, high concept style company, so I often say that Defiant, we're in the business of growing games, not of designing them. And as I guess the person in charge of design, that makes me sound like I don't do much, which is probably true.
It's not even wearing shoes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what we do is we start with an idea that we want to pull at, and we kind of start iterating and prototyping. And we built this RPG for tablets, action RPG, Diablo style, called Heroes Call. And Heroes Call did all this really clever randomization under the hood. You could play any part of that game, no matter what level and abilities and gear you had, and we'd dynamically generate it and mix in the story, and it would all work fine. And that was really hard work and really clever, and nobody ever noticed. And we could have built a linear game, and it would have been exactly the same, and probably better, because we would have tuned it better. So we came out of that, and we're like, well, that was a lot of effort and not a lot of reward. And, you know, in the classic movie sense, put your money on the screen. Do we just make a linear game next, or is there something there? And we went, there's something there, but how do we communicate randomness to people? And then at some point, cards came into the conversation. And as soon as we said cards, a lot of us are board gamers and card gamers, we were like, shit, yeah, that is, we can do stuff with that, because then you can have cards that let you draw other cards, you can shuffle the deck, you can do this. And then it went off and racing. And over time, the dealer came into the mix, courtesy of Sean, our art director, and kind of my obsession with finding a way of having a character who communicates and is rich. I knew we could do one character well, so that's what we did. And deck building came in as we were progressing along and putting those elements together. So at each point, there was a natural next step from exploring the ideas and looking at what would be cool.
The cards as a physical thing in the game seem like a really interesting element, because a lot of video games that are about card games just have representations of the cards. You don't actually see them as things like in a hand or as things being shuffled, and the way that they fly around the screen, I don't get bored of watching. Like, were you inspired by actual specific card games?
So there's kind of two parts to that question. The first is, yes, absolutely. Dominion was a huge influence, I think, on how we were thinking about cards. And I'm an old Magic the Gathering player from the first limited edition. But I also used to be, for my sins, a stage magician and card magician back in my teenage years. And
that is the best thing.
Awesome.
That's so cool.
So I'm super obsessed about the cards feeling like real cards. And I'm also a gamer and a game designer, and you know, they need to move right, they need to feel right, they need to feel as if they're actually there in the world. And when we go to draw a card, you know, we might say, draw a helmet from the deck. Well, it's easy for the programmers to magically make the next card be a helmet. But we don't do that. We'll flip through the cards until we get to a helmet and then draw you a helmet. And all of that's about honouring the reality of the things that we're emulating. And I'm really pleased with how that's all gone.
So now I'm actually just imagining you sitting there, like doing lots of magic and card tricks and things, while your art director is actually just furiously scribbling down and taking notes on what your hands look like, or filming. Was there any of that?
So
involved?
there is some great video footage of our animator who animated the dealer, Mike Baxter, doing a lot of reference capture for that. And yeah, we have decks of cards, and I was sitting in there doing riffle shuffles, and he's like, yeah, I can't do that. How about if he flies them around? I'm like, that seems fine.
So, speaking of the dealer, it's a really interesting idea to just have a single character there who's not just, like, they narrate what you do, but they're also, like, I I've read other people's account of them where they take him to be far more antagonistic, whereas I think that I feel like he's almost sort of on my side a bit, like he's the jerk older brother who wants to play the game with you, but is a jerk because that's just how he is. How do you balance that kind of personality?
I think and there's evolutions of his story over the course of the game, and I think he comes from this place of he is that jerk older brother, and he really would prefer if he was playing against somebody who's good, and mostly he's not, and that's his kind of base assumption when you come in is so many people have come by who are rubbish at this game. Here is yet another. Nobody will ever appreciate my genius, and as you progress, he starts to have that kind of begrudging. Well, maybe you will appreciate my genius. Maybe you can see how clever I am, but you'll never defeat me. And of course that goes hideously awry in the end. Spoilers, but that's the game.
I've seen comparisons to the guy from Nightmare. That old video board game.
Yeah.
Oh,
He sort of
the Crypt Keeper.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
the Crypt Keeper.
This guy.
Well,
brilliant.
and I don't think that's a crazy comparison. Not that I ever played Nightmare. I'd only ever saw the ads on TV, which were awesome 80s ads. But that, in a lot of ways, the game to me is a real throwback to the 80s. Now, it's not a throwback to the 80s video games. It's a throwback to all the stuff I was doing in the 80s, some of which was playing video games, but the vast majority was, playing D&D, stuff like Nightmare, fighting fantasy novels, choose your own adventures, reading, 70s fantasy novels, so Michael Moorcock all the way through to, a whole bunch of Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, and there's so this kind of combination of terrible pulp with some better stuff, and a sense of the burgeoning existence of role playing and tabletop gaming, and all of that is the roots that we've kind of pulled through to bring the dealer to life.
Yeah, he reminded me more specifically of like the dungeon master running a D&D game for kids who just don't get it, and then when you actually do start killing his bosses, then he's just mad at you for ruining his game. You can't win.
Yeah.
We've been talking to Morgan Jaffit, creative director of Defiant Development's new game Hand of Fate. We were talking before about how great it is having all of the cards flying around and the dealer, but there's another side to this game as well. It's also an action game. You get to whack a bunch of dudes with axes and stuff. It's like two games in one. It's like you get double the money. And at what point did you realize, maybe we should have the option to murder some people in our card game? Or was that from the start?
No, that was from the start, because we did have we had the tablet game Heroes Call that we'd built, which was like a Diablo-esque murder. Our kind of quality of murder had escalated. But actually, what happened was, we have this kind of overall policy of try and do something that builds on the skills we've built from making previous games, and at the same time try and move our craft forward. Try and learn something that we haven't done. And we were looking at devices with controllers, which was our prediction as to things that were going to end up big that year. This is back in 2013, at the start of 2013, when it was going to take us a year to finish, and ended up taking us 2. But we thought, we'd heard rumours Apple was releasing an Apple TV with a controller. We'd heard rumours that Google and Amazon had similar things planned. The Vita was on the list. The next-gen consoles were coming. All of that seemed like NVIDIA had a device. We're like, controllers are the thing. So a mobile game, stepped up for the lounge room was what we were thinking. And most of those things didn't happen. So we were really lucky that the next-gen consoles and Steam ended up being big, and that kind of became apparent over the evolution of the game. But it was originally designed as a couch game for Android and iOS-based micro consoles. Ouya, other things that went down the toilet over that period. So it yeah, that's where the desire to kind of up our game on the combat side came from.
You were saying, so you've got something like 450 cards in the game?
Something like that, yeah.
So what goes into actually like conceiving and then implementing?
Well, the vast majority of that was handled by our design team. And depending on the card, there's a bunch of different ways it can go. So we have everything from something relatively simple, like a ring. So a ring gets a 3D model because you can see it in the shop, but it doesn't actually get put on the character's fingers. So we need a 3D model for it, and we've had some great modelers doing that. And it gets card art from Jesse, who's our card artist, and it gets an in-game effect, which is implemented by our programmers and designed by our designers. All at the other end of the scale for in-game gear is armor, and armor generally, has things like flames coming off it, and it's a 3D model that's mapped to the character. So Paul, our particle artist, will do particles for it so that we get the effect. We'll have that built in game and model to the character. Our character artist RJ might do some work on that, and again, card art and visual design. For an encounter, some of the encounters are pure text. There are adventure chains where you can never end up in combat, like the Maiden, which is an encounter with an elf in a forest, and then there are others that have. So Courtney has designed some incredible chains of adventures where one card will unlock the next, and you start by sticking your nose in where it doesn't belong during a dark meeting of cultists and find out they're vampires, and kind of proceed along that line, and they can have like a mix up of story parts, action parts. Ben, who's our environment artist, will build environments. There's over 80 unique environments in the game, and a lot of those are built to some of the encounters that take place in them, and yeah, that's sort of evolution has happened, and it's been really good because we've got a tool chain that's enabled us to build that sort of content as we go. And the design team and the team overall have done a really good job of, because we've had a lot of time to spend on this game. 2 years is a long time in our standards of game development. It's not much for Rockstar, but we've had a lot of time. We've had it in the public eye for a long time because we've been in early access for 7 months. So we've had a chance to really explore where some of these concepts go and take them to really interesting places and see what people respond to and give them more of that.
Those cards that unlock more story are a really interesting element because it's the kind of game I find myself sitting down to play a couple of hands, and that's all. I don't sit down and play it for an entire night like I would a big role-playing game or something. But each time you come back, you're getting the next card in some sequence, and it's like the story is continuing. I met those vampires. I'm up to like Blood Auction 3.
Yep.
And I feel like I'm halfway through a story, and I want to find out what happens next. And next time I play a hand, if I don't screw up, I will.
And that's certainly our approach. Like, there are lots of people who have like 40 or 50 hours of play, but we say that there's like 13 or 14 good solid campaign hours, and through that there's a lot going on. Like, there's always something to draw you back, but I do think the game's best as a short session game. Like, it's best as something you pick up, play a couple of hands, do something else, and for console or PC that's a short session. For mobile, where Crossy Road gets too long if you're getting high scores, then it's a really long session game. But the goal was always to have something that you could get some good value out of, even with 20 minutes.
One of the backer rewards for your Kickstarter campaign was the chance to design a card for the game. Did that end up turning out? And if so, what were the designs that the guys gave you?
So what was really wonderful about both of those, we had 3 designer cards in there, and one of them drew from his own personal experience and basically went back to one of his fondest college memories of wandering through the college with a guitar on his back, coming back from like music practice or something, and basically being invited in to a random drunken party that was going on, and spending the entire evening just sitting in the corner playing tunes for this group of people who thought that was wonderful. So that kind of morphed into the minstrel, which became the card there. We had another one who was incredibly interested in alchemy and was writing up some thesis material around ancient alchemy, and that led to the card Quicksilver, which is really interesting. And then there's a family friend whose favourite poem is a poem called Sweetwoods, which turns into the Sweetwoods Nymphs, which ends up being one of the most important cards in the end game as it happens. So what I really loved about those was that they all kind of came from personal stories, and nobody was coming at them with that kind of old school D&D beat the player, I want to make the most brutal card that will crush people. Everyone was most interested in the storytelling, and that was really gratifying.
Awesome. So Hand of Fate is available now for what platforms, Morgan?
So it's currently available for PC, Mac and Linux on Steam, Humble Store and Good Old Game. It's available on PS4 and Xbox One through their downloadable stores, and it will be coming to PS Vita soon.
Morgan, thank you very much for joining us on the show. It was an absolute pleasure, and thanks for the insight on the development of Hand of Fate.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Ray, you have been playing a game called The Order 1886 on your PS4, kind of a steampunky action game. Is that sort of fair? Sort of Victorian times, and you've got guns.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Are there
Review
Zeppelins?
done.
There are Zeppelins.
I thought so.
There are monsters as well,
There's
right?
monsters. There's Nikola Tesla.
He's always good.
Oh,
Yeah.
man, tick all of the things on the checklist.
Yeah. Is anyone wearing a top hat that has gears on it?
Goggles.
No real goggles, but there are cool uniforms. There are cool weapons. And, Zeppelins, as Jody mentioned before.
Mustaches as well.
Mustaches, exactly right. But this one is by Ready at Dawn, who are previously known for their work on the PSP God of War games. This is their first big AAA console game, so it's an interesting one. It's been delayed a bunch of times as well, so it's got a lot of eyes on it. And it's a PS4 exclusive, which for some reason makes people more judgmental about it on the internet. So the setting is London in an alternate reality where the Knights of the Round Table found the Holy Grail and have been kind of expanding their life by drinking sips of holy water. All the meantime, there's been this pest problem, werewolves and half vampires and things like that. And there's also a bit of political action going on. There's rebels and stuff that aren't happy with the way things are. So that's our setting.
So wait, is King Arthur still on the throne or Queen Victoria?
Yeah, someone is.
It's
really
Queen Victoria.
Clearly, you've paid attention to the politics and royals.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, it's pretty unique and awesome setting. The setting itself is solid. It's all that stuff that I described, plus Nikola Tesla is your personal armorer. You play a cool guy with a mustache and an awesome uniform, and you'd think that I'd be describing the best game ever.
That sounds like everything I want in a video game.
Yeah.
Up to a
Mustache
point.
Simulator 2015
Yeah.
Lee's favourite video game.
I can't wait. Finally be able to grow the mustache that I can't in the real world.
Now, you can see where the money's gone, but unfortunately, it doesn't really hit the mark for me. It's a bit of a disappointment. Lots of wasted opportunities. Now, I'll start with the things I liked about the game.
Okay.
The representations of the world building, the voice acting, the sound design, these are all awesome things. The game just looks gorgeous. It's up there with Metal Gear Solid 5, Ground Zeroes, and Assassin's Creed Unity as some of the best console graphics I've ever seen. Just the world, when you're looking out into London and there's Zeppelins going across, and you're just gazing out upon it all. It just looks wonderful. And the sound design, which is something that we don't really talk about in games, is really something that I should mention as well. I played it with headphones, and there's actually different sound effects for when you're walking on different surfaces. If you're on gravel, there's this different footprint noise or whatever.
Is it all in London? Is it just wandering around the streets and in buildings?
Well, most of the time you'll be underground in sewers or things like that. There is
video games.
Yeah. So despite the setting, it kind of falls back upon the usual video game trope of just like funneling you down these dark corridors. And it's kind of a real shame because there is a bit of world building at the start where you're exploring the city and things like that. But unfortunately, yeah, you just, most of the time, you're either in a dimly lit corridor or you're in like a lit corridor. And there's baddies that come at you.
So they've got like all the environments you need.
So is in like
right?
a half a candle or a full candle lit?
Pretty much.
Right.
Yeah, so the action it's third-person action like you'd find in Uncharted or Gears of War or games like that. Unfortunately, in those games, unfortunately for Order, when you compare it to those games, it falls a bit short because the bad guys, they don't have any intelligence at all. They either stand there and pop up at you at regular intervals, or they move from point A to point B, occasionally to point C, and then back to point A. And then there's a guy with a shotgun who charges you, and that's pretty much it, apart from some of the monsters that are there. So you never really feel engaged, like you're fighting a real enemy. It's kind of just like a shooting gallery.
How much do the monsters come into it? Because I like monsters. I'll shoot monsters.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason that drew me into the game. I mean, those monsters, the werewolves. Unfortunately, the first werewolf encounter is very dull.
Yeah.
Like,
What?
Like, the introduction is really cool. Like, there's a big cut scene, and you see the werewolf transform from a human into a wolf, and it's really scary, and then he runs off into the dark, and you've only got a torch, and you're thinking, oh, gee, this is really tense. But then he sort of... The werewolf goes into just a repeated kind of cycle of jumping out at you, lunging, and then you have to push the X button when he comes up. There's no real sense of like there's an actual animal stalking me. It's just like, okay, I've got to push X now, and if I didn't, then that sucks because I've got to repeat that sequence again.
So can you memorize the moves then? You know,
kind
like
of,
to get through. Like if you stuff up the first or second time, then you know where you're going.
Nothing feels organic. It's like everything's just in a sequence, you know, so you don't get the feeling like you're going against real bad guys at all. Yeah, so the word that kept coming to my mind when I was playing the shooting sections, which is much of the game, was tedious.
Oh,
This is really tedious. Like, the only reward you've got for clearing a room full of bad guys is that you get to progress to the next area. There's no real XP system that rewards you for killing bad guys. There's no crafting system to speak of where you can collect loot and turn it into weapons or upgrade them at all. Your reward is simply to progress, and so it feels really crappy when you clear the room and then like the second wave of reinforcements comes in. You know, it just feels like padding.
But now things like Uncharted and Gears of War didn't have that. They were still like third-person cover-based shooters, and yet they were rewarding because the gift for solving a combat scenario was that you would get to play another combat scenario, right? So does this not, like, is the act of playing not fun in itself?
Not for me.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's just... Yeah, like, I felt like I was in a shooting gallery.
Yeah.
And there's just so many missed opportunities. Like, there's a scene aboard an airship. You know, you're fighting on a Zeppelin. You'd think that would be really cool, right? It would be spectacular and really awesome. But unfortunately, the centerpiece for that stage is a gun battle in a kitchen in the airship. You know, with sort of waist height furniture all around, and it's basically just a kitchen shootout.
Are there forks and
No
cans? Are there cans?
No cans.
Oh my god, they can't even do kitchens right.
Yeah. Yeah, so, look, there are some cool weapons. As I said before, Nikola Tesla is your man.
He was known for making cool weapons.
Yeah.
Does he give you a death ray?
Well, there's an arc gun.
Yeah.
Yes.
What?
It's basically a gun that fires lightning at people, and that's really cool. I mean, you charge it up, you shoot the lightning, and it just cleaves through enemies, and they just like fry and sizzle, and you know all that horrible stuff that happens when you get struck by lightning. Now the first
Candy's grinning.
The first time
I'm not
you use
grinning.
the gun,
I'm grinning a little. So far, well, this sounds good. This bit.
you get to shoot a werewolf. They give you the gun and say, hey, this is some high-tech stuff, man. Be careful with it.
Did you
shoot
fry
a
him?
werewolf, and then you run out of charge, and then hours pass, and you're not allowed to use the arc gun. You have to use your machine gun or your pistol. And
Well, what's the point of that? If you have the opportunity to let people sizzle, why
Well,
just go back to a boring
I'm not
gun?
sure why. I think it might have been like it was too powerful and they couldn't leave it in, but it's really cruel how they give you this really awesome weapon and then just like you can only use it once, and then for the most part you're just using weapons that you'd find in other games, pistols, machine guns, shotguns, and stuff like that. I should also mention the I think it's the phosphate gun or something like that.
Oh yeah,
Burn people.
Yeah, it shoots out like this
powder.
Powder.
combustive powder, and then after that you shoot out a spark and it kind of like sizzles.
That sounds cool.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool.
It sounds really cool, right?
Well, does it sizzle or is it like
It's
catching
like a
fire,
high
proper
intensity
exciting?
kind of not an explosion because there's no like
blue heat?
but it just ignites at a really high temperature for a short amount of time. And the way that works is actually pretty awesome. Like it sort of falls over the people and then you can choose when to shoot the spark at them, and then horrible burning things happen when you do that, and it's a lot of fun. Now this gun is the same way. You get like 9 rounds of ammo and then you're stuck using your crappy guns again for hours and hours and hours.
What sort of accents are in the game?
Do one. No,
do one now.
Largely
British.
British.
Isn't it like someone was saying that it's a game where you mostly shoot the hats off Irishmen? Is that accurate?
To be sure. Oh, it's not even.
That's a different game.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm just saying. Like, are there hats?
There's I think so.
Like bowler hats and top hats?
No, that's a different game.
Moustache physics.
Yeah, well, there's moustaches and hair physics. I'm not, I wasn't really paying attention. That wasn't on my notes that I was scribbling down, Jody, but...
Okay, well, if your moustache doesn't like blow dramatically in the breeze, I'm out.
Well, how would you know, though? It's a third-person game. You're seeing him from behind. Unless he's got a mustache on the back of his head. Which maybe he does. Does he?
No.
Is that the secret?
Yeah. So, to conclude my review...
Can you conclude in a British accent?
No, I can't, Candy.
Razor. Taking all the fun
Will
out.
you cut it out?
I'd like to formally apologise to all the British people listening right
Just
now.
all
Seriously.
listeners
That
ever.
was terrible.
The story is pretty good, and I have to mention the voice acting. It does drop you off in the middle of a story that's sort of in progress, and it doesn't do much to hold your hand. At a point, I was just wishing that my main character would get amnesia, so someone would just explain what's happening to me in very plain English. But I appreciate the fact that they've gone to the lengths to make it feel like a living, breathing setting, and the setting is great. I'd love to see a new game in this world. It's fantastic. Ultimately, the game ends in a disappointing way. There's a lot of unanswered questions. It feels like it's setting up for a sequel, but I mean, this is a standalone product. I'm here for a complete gaming experience. It doesn't really deliver, and I should also mention it's quite short as well. There's about 15 or 16 chapters. 8 of those chapters are cutscenes, and of those cutscenes, several of them are less than 4 minutes in length.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good math people out there can work this out.
It's a pretty short game. There's no reason to really come back because there's no like collectibles to speak of. There are collectibles, but there's no measurement of, there's no guide to what you've collected.
Yeah.
It doesn't keep track of the things you've got, so you have to like go on YouTube and follow one of those if you want to get the collectibles for the achievement.
No.
And who wants to do that?
Right.
Some
No
people,
one.
but not me.
So you're saying hold out for the next weird Victorian era game where you fight monsters then?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been talking about the Order 1886, which is available exclusively for the PS4. That's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Zed Games, guys. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks.
We'll be back next week at the same time. What have you got on your arm there, Lee?
A ladybug just flew on me.
That's good luck.
Why are there ladybugs in the radio studio? This is not right. Also, it won't get off.
All right.